Dream Scenario is written and directed by Christopher Borgli, and it stars Nicolas Cage as Paul Matthews, a college professor who out of nowhere begins to appear in millions of people's dreams around the world. The premise for this film alone had me bought in. The sky-high potential in its concept and Nicolas Cage leading was enough for me to know I'd be seeing it. And everything starts off pretty strong, with Paul slowly coming to the realization of what's happening and the quick whiplash of sensationalism that has an enormous impact on his life. There's some really creative dream sequences, and in the first act, the film unravels itself in a very satisfying way. However, I don't think it sticks the landing as well as it could have. But before I get into that, I do want to talk about what worked here. This is a relatively funny film, even though I didn't hear a single laugh from the audience at my screening, which is kinda crazy. Now, I wasn't exactly laughing out loud myself, but there is an off-kilter and awkward nature to the direction and dialogue that really helps sell the amusing aspects of the story. A lot of the humor shines through the editing. There are some really well-timed cuts, and the pace of the film is really the glue holding it together. Comedy in film is really reliant on the edit. Borgli, being both the director and editor of this one, really does a great job of knowing when to give the audience room to breathe and when to call our attention to something more absurd. You can see he has a real talent for envisioning the tempo of a scene. There's even some bold choices to occasionally make these really jarring and quick cuts that somehow work and even add to the disorienting or uncomfortable moments. I haven't seen his other films, so I didn't have a point of reference going into this one, but I did walk away really appreciating his technical ability. The cinematography is also nice. It's shot on film and there's a lot of halation, which I suppose adds to the dreaminess of it all. Overall, there is a consistency in tone and it is stylistically cohesive. Unfortunately, this film has a few problems that end up hindering my overall appreciation for it. First things first, I think Nicolas Cage is fairly decent in this role. He's an amazing actor who has already proven himself on numerous occasions, but there are times here where he is kind of overdoing it. It's not that it's a bad performance, but it doesn't let off the gas enough. There isn't much for us to latch onto, and I know he's perfectly capable of playing a more reserved character. Just watch Pig. There isn't the same nuance here that I'd have hoped for, and honestly, most of this is not his fault. This is really just an underwritten character to begin with. The script is really the sore thumb of the film. There are many different approaches that can be taken when writing a protagonist. The lead character doesn't necessarily have to be one the audience roots for, but with how much Paul Matthews gets figuratively and literally beat up throughout the film, it's sort of asking that you sympathize with him to some extent. Similar to Beau is Afraid, we're supposed to tag along with this bumbling buffoon who's going through a midlife crisis, and as the audience, we're supposed to find reason to care about him. But I just couldn't, personally. I'd be more forgiving of this if the film's thematic elements had stronger legs to stand on, but so much of the thesis falls flat. It wants to be an indictment on cancel culture and commercialism, but it reads more superficial than introspective. I did appreciate the commentary on the vanity of relationships that spawn out of fame and how self-motivated everyone is, how quick people will turn on you when you're no longer optically clean in the limelight, but that's about it for the thematic strengths. There's multiple moments that feel like sidetracks, like the subplot involving Dylan Galula's character that doesn't really serve much relevance to the overarching story. It just leads to a ridiculously awkward scene that is kind of funny, but ultimately inconsequential. I'm sure audiences will get a kick out of it regardless. There's also this abrupt introduction to a piece of technology that seemed like it'd have significant ramifications, but it ends up being a glorified plot device used as an excuse to get Paul from point A to point B. The whole thing feels like it was shoehorned in there. If this was just a surface level comedy, I wouldn't be so harsh on it, but it clearly wants to be something more, and unfortunately it didn't pick a single direction, so when it wants to be all these things at once, it ends up being substantively scarce, leaving you with little to chew on. It's also just the fact that the whole cancel culture thing has been done before, but like, better. I don't think every film needs to have a profound thesis, but if you're gonna try to signal to the audience that you have something to say, my expectation is that you'd have fleshed that idea out a bit more than Dream Scenario did. And outside of Cage's character, there's also not much for us to really care about. Not enough screen time is allocated to his familial relationships or any other character for that matter. I liked Michael Cera in this though, and the rest of the cast, Julianne Nicholson, Tim Meadows. It's not a bad film. I know it's starting to sound like I hate it, but I don't. I think I was just a little bit disappointed because of how promising the premise was. This year seems to be full of weird movies that are trying to break the mold, and it's something that I admire even if they don't all land for me. Still have no idea what to say about Saltburn. I don't know if I'm even gonna make a video on that one. Regardless, I'm sure many people will enjoy Dream Scenario more than I did. A24 is no stranger to absurd comedies, and this is yet another one they've added to their arsenal that will scratch the itch of a certain crowd. Overall, I think this film is worth checking out, for the simple fact that it's entertaining at the least, and it does have its moments. Remember, this is just my opinion. Feel free to sound off in the comments. I'd like to see what you guys have to say, and since you made it to the end of the video, you might as well leave a like, and you might as well subscribe. But yeah, thanks for watching.